Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Spinetinglers book series, and it's book number 13, Pet Store. Now, in case you guys haven't tuned into my Spinetinglers book reviews in the past, Spinetinglers was a Goosebumps knockoff series that I read as a kid, and some of these covers were done by cover artists for the Goosebumps series. Most notably Mark Nagata, who did covers for the first 22 Give Yourself Goosebumps books, and Tim Jacobus, who did art for the original 62 and Series 2000. And this cover is a Tim Jacobus cover. And I remember seeing this at my library when I was a kid, but I never read it because I thought it looked really stupid. And after reading it as an adult, this is easily one of the worst kids' horror books I've ever read. And it's a shame because, you know, Spinetinglers, you know, for it being a Goosebumps knockoff series, it lasted 30 books, right? And that is, I think, the second most of any of the Goosebumps knockoff series. So there's so many books in this series. I've raved about a couple of them. They're all done by ghost writers. Some, like the writer of this book, George Edward Stanley, did more than others. And some writers only did one. Don't let the, by the way, don't let the author M.T. Coffin, you know, throw you for a loop. It's just a pen name. It's supposed to be like a play on the term empty coffin. But every book is written by a different author, and I think that's probably my natural gravitation towards the series. I've heard many people say the same thing about Ghosts of Fear Street. But I dare say, like I said, this is the worst, one of the worst kids' horror books I've ever read in my life. I thought Your Turn to Scream was the bottom of the barrel of this series. But this is a close competition for that. Whenever I get down to a series rating, expect this to be pretty much at the bottom somewhere. At least in the bottom 3. This is an abomination. I would not go out of my way to recommend this book to anybody, but for the sake of brevity and review purposes, I will touch on the plot and give you my review at the end. But this is going to be more of a riff than a review. So just know that. So yeah, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off with this girl named Amber, and she is the main protagonist of the story. And she's upset that she has to leave her life in this town called Forest View. And from what it's described is that it's separated by a really long distance from the nearest town, which is called Wolfburg. And her father is like this established executive at this company. He works for a paper company, I think. And, you know, he has an eclectic personality. He goes on these things called Bigfoot patrols. And he's realized that his calling in life isn't being an executive and making a lot of money and living in Forest View comfortably. He wants to have his dream job, which is guarding things and being on patrol. So this couple in this town called Wolfsburg is called the Pinchers. And the Pinchers have sent their father a job offer to be a security guard, essentially. And the father has taken the job and has pretty much told the family they're going to up and move their lives to Wolfsburg. And you get this sense that Amber does not want to move. Neither does her little brother Nick, but Nick seems to be more, you know, excited about it. And they take this long car ride through the mountains, and then they eventually end up upon this town called Wolfsburg. And this is where the story really derails. It gets really terrible. So when they arrive in Wolfsburg, they arrive at this hotel called the Wolfsburg Inn, and the family is greeted by a dog, right? And there's a gas station nearby, so they stop at the gas station to get some gas. And the dog is essentially running the gas station and pumping their gas, talking to them with this electric monitor around his collar. And instead of thinking something is wrong here, the family decides to just wait it out. They've driven a long time. They're going to try to stay at the inn tonight, get some sleep. So they pay the dog serviceman at the gas station. They head to the Wolfsburg Inn. There's a dog bellhop thing there, ready to take their bags and take them to their rooms, which are essentially human dog houses outside. And they sleep there for the night. And the kids are panicked, and they're like, look, this town is run by dogs. And urges the parents to really reconsider moving here and go back. And the parents say they'll discuss it in the morning. Well, the next morning comes, and the parents have decided to stay in Wolfsburg because they've already, left. They've already started packing their things. They have the house on the market. The dad quit their job. There's nothing for them to go back to in Forest View. So they're going to try to see and, maybe adapt to this life in Wolfsburg. Well, later that morning, there's a whole scene of them eating food out of a dog bowl, which is essentially kibble that they flavored human food. And they're eating this kibble. It tastes like bacon and eggs. And after eating the kibble, Amber starts to notice that she's starting to act kind of strange. She gets kind of itchy. She has this urge to do things like a dog. Her brother is kind of the same way, and her parents seem to have eaten more and might be further progressed. Now, this food mechanism, maybe what they're putting in the food to control the humans, is never explained in the story. Neither is how this town is run by dogs. There's no context whatsoever, so you need to know this moving forward. So the Pinchers, the father's boss, comes to the kennel to pick up the parents. And essentially, the parents have to leave the kids, and they get sent to this place called the pet store, where hopefully the kids will get adopted by a dog family. Because Wolfsburg has a law saying that no humans can be in the town unless they're owned by owners and on a leash. I'm not kidding. So the parents go off to the father's new job, being essentially a guard dog for a family of dogs. And the mom is going to be a house dog, like the family pet. And the siblings go off to this place called the pet store. And there, Amber starts to give back talk to the kennel runners, and they call her, a bad human, and saying that she'll never get adopted, doing what she's doing, and she's pretty much going to stay there forever, or eventually end up at this place called the Pound. Well, while she's there, she ends up befriending this girl named Jessica. Jessica has revealed to her that she's been in the pet store for a year, and she hates it there, and she's been planning an escape. But there was an arrangement made with the Pinchers and the pet store operators that Amber's mom and dad can have visits with them at the pet store until they get adopted. And this is supposed to be a play on how, kind of like in animals, with pet animals, right? When they give birth, the mother sticks around for a little bit, the parents are around, and then the kids get taken off and adopted to other families. And there's this morbid sense that these kids are going to be taken away from their family just by moving to this town, right? Well, Jessica gives her a gift of this dog, like this silver whistle that ends up being a dog whistle. And she thinks it doesn't work, but later on in the story, that's what it's revealed to be. So Amber holds on to this to remember Jessica by, and her and her brother are set to remain in this pet store for the time being. Well, eventually, the mom and dad come to visit, and the Pinchers are entertaining getting more pets. They are entertaining getting another guard dog because they have a huge size property at the edge of Wolfsburg, and they need two. And they also want a show dog. So, by recommendation, the mom and dad has told them to go, maybe get Amber and Nick. And on a test run, by taking them back to the house, the Pinchers have decided to adopt Amber and Nick and keep the family of humans together. And that excites the whole family. And Amber tries breaking through to her father once more, but the father seems to be further progressed and acting like an animal. The mom feels really ashamed and can't really do anything about it. And her brother Nick seems to be really happy about becoming a pet, because being a human sounds lame to him, and being a pet is more of a simple life. So Amber's pretty much stuck. She doesn't really know what to do. But she notices that the woods are on the edge, you know, of the fence line of her new home, and talking with Jessica earlier made her realize that that must be her key to escaping. Well, it comes ahead, you know, after a few really random shenanigans. Jessica reveals herself that she's escaped from the pet store, and she shows up in behind Amber's kennel behind the fence one night, and, you know, Amber's talking with her, and they come up with this idea to maybe dig a tunnel so they can, you know, interact with each other. So they dig this tunnel, and Jessica comes through, and Jessica and Amber start exhibiting signs that being in this town has altered them a little bit. Like, Amber is starting to have this urge to dig. Her hands curl up into what she calls paws, and she has this overwhelming urge to do that. She pants like a dog. She has her tongue sticking out like a dog. She's, you know, drinking out of a dog bowl, eating dog kibble, right? Essentially. So they have this tunnel open, but they notice that there's this band of wild humans that seem to have followed Jessica and might be trying to infiltrate the backyard, which spurs Jessica and Amber into an idea that maybe there's a possibility to escape this Wolfsburg town and everybody can go back to civilization. And they're reminiscing about their old lives and how awesome it would be to do that. Well, the problem is that the father and her brother Nick are so far gone into being guard dogs that that's pretty much what they've chosen to do. And because she's been acting up, and because, you know, all this random shenanigans, it's not even worth bringing up because it really matters nothing to the story, has spurred up some controversy with Amber being in the family. They want to send her to obedience school, right? So she goes to obedience school, and she meets these two twin humans who have the same sympathy as her and Jessica. And she feels like she can trust these two, so she goes to them and says, okay, we have this tunnel. And the girls think it's a good idea, and she's like, well, the problem is with the tunnel is that, you know, wild humans have come up close to it, and the twins are like, yeah, you got to be careful about wild humans, but maybe we can use this tunnel for something. You know, maybe we can use it to escape. That seems like to be the only thing to escape. Once you get into the forest, the only dogs that will come after you are these things called the police dogs. And they're the only ones brave enough to go into the forest. Essentially, the kids come to the conclusion, especially Amber, that this tunnel is a great idea, and she's going to ask Jessica to help build more tunnels because they come up with this idea to essentially use tunnels to have a mass escape of humans, and if there's a lot of them that escape, the police dogs can't do anything about it. So since Amber was bought to be a show dog, there is a human show is what they call it. And the family wants to take her to her human show to show her off and show how obedient she is. And she, you know, does good. She gets some treats at first. It's really bizarre and cringy. But then she realizes that this big show needs to happen. And at the right time, the humans, all the humans at the show need to make a mass exodus towards the Pincher's home to leave in these tunnels. So Jessica and Amber get to work. They build all these tunnels in the backyard under the suspicion and the thumb of the father. And she even has a heart-to-heart with her mom, who comes outside one night when the dogs let her out. And the mom meets Jessica, and they tell her up front the whole plan. Well, it goes south one day once the tunnel gets exposed and all these wild humans start pouring through and raiding the town. They want to put off the dog show, so they have to go through this whole ordeal to get the dog show put back on. And once they do, they have this plan set in motion, but they need the help of their family. So Amber recruits her brother to stay behind at the house and guard the house with the dad and guard these tunnels that they've made. And what they're going to do is, on the day of the show, like I said, there's going to be a mass exodus. Well, it comes to that point, and let's just say Amber executes the plan, and all the humans go to exodus the town. They go through the tunnels, they break their way through, and they're being chased by police dogs. Well, they end up you know, evading the police dogs because of this dog whistle that I mentioned earlier that Amber was given by Jessica. And they evade the police dogs, and, you know, the family all escaped intact. Her brother Nick, her mom, and her father are all thankful for Amber's plan. And when Amber tells the story about Jessica, Jessica's pretty much astray at this point. She lost her family. Jessica has no idea where her family is. They agreed to, like, unofficially but officially adopt Jessica and take her with her when they try to make their way back to Forest View, where their old life was. Well, after evading the police dogs, they get cornered by these wild humans, which are revealed, and I'm not kidding here, they're revealed to be Bigfoot. And what happened to these people was, when they tried to leave Wolfsburg and they stayed in the forest, they became wild. And they became Bigfoot. And now they're too uncivilized to go back to Forest View. So what they do in between the forest of Forest View and Wolfsburg is they go around and raiding towns. So Amber's like, well, let's come up with a compromise here. And they end up coming with a compromise that may or may not work. And the ending, to even call it an ending, just ends with them essentially at the bluffs of Forest View. You know, the family, now a family of 5 if you include Jessica, Amber's friend that she's made. And it pretty much ends there, with no real resolution of what's to come after that. And that's essentially Pet Store. Okay? So yeah, this book is atrocious. Okay? If I had any positives with this book, it's pretty much Amber and the writing that Stanley put into her character. You know, the other book I think I've read from Stanley, I might have read another one, but the one that comes to mind is The Dead Kid Did It. I think Stanley's writing in that book, there was no character descriptions. It was very dialogue heavy, very jumpy throughout the story, and it made it kind of hard to read. Here, I think it's a better written book than that in terms of writing, not in terms of story, plotting, any of that. But I will say that Amber's monologue was one saving grace to this book from it being just one of the bottom of bottom I've ever read. Amber was a decent character. She had a good head on her shoulders. She had some intuition. We didn't really know what she looked like or really much of her hobbies or interests. She was kind of a cardboard character morphed into the situation she was thrown into, but she was still an engaging protagonist. There are some weird things that happen with her that really go unexplained, but she was fine. And her monologue kind of carried the story. It made it easy to read despite the constant cringing I had reading this book. So that's the one compliment I can give this book. Everything else is a huge dumpster fire, pure hot garbage. Let's start off with the biggest goose egg I think about the whole book. The context to anything in this book is irrelevant and does not matter whatsoever. It is absolutely terrible, okay? The family gets thrown into this town of Wolfsburg where there's no backstory to this town. All we know is that the father has taken this job in a town where he's done no research, which is really dumb. And they end up in this town and they see dogs talking with electronic collars, and they don't think to turn around and fight sleep to go back home. They just say, okay, well, we're just going to stay here for the night. We're too tired. And they still go along with it and try to make the best of it. But there's no explanation to how this thing with dogs have happened. How does this town exist? Where are they? It's implied that they're in the same country because Forest View is over here and then Wolfsburg's over here. But throughout the story, Wolfsburg is implied to be its own separate entity, its own separate nation of sorts. And it's really bizarre. Like, how do people not know about this? Do you not think to research anything? How do people not know that there's people that have gone missing into the supposed town called Wolfsburg? You don't think that people would mention to their family members, hey, I got this job offer in this town, and nobody would ever think to look into it? And on top of that, there's this angle to the story that the more they eat this food that they're given, the more they're given this treatment where they have to live in these dog houses, they start turning into dogs. They feel like their hands become paws. Even the dad in some parts of the story, I didn't really mention this, but he's barking and talking. Like, he barks sometimes and he talks. They itch like they have fleas. What's causing this to happen? There's never any explanation to it. It's just a thing in the story. It's absolutely egregious and insulting almost to throw a reader into a story like this with no real backstory. And because of that, there's no context to anything. You can't really buy what the story is selling you. The only thing you get what Stanley's trying to do here is he's essentially saying that, and he even says it outright with one of these side characters that are part of this human, exodus later on in the story, that being a pet is rough. You're taken away from your family, blah, blah, blah. We get it. This is a whole metaphor about pets being taken away from their families, at a young age. We get it. But it's so bizarre. I feel like even R.L. Stein has never taken this much drugs to write something this out there. And in a lot of ways, this almost feels like a mockery of kids' horror. Nothing in this book is scary. It's all situational thrills and situational, horror. To even call it that, there's no outright scenes that are scary in this. It's all just pandemonium about being stuck in a town where they essentially pull a Planet of the Apes and say that humans are pets and servants to animals. And that's such a disgrace to stories like Planet of the Apes, which tell a really good science fiction story there with a really deep lore and backstory about why that is. This has none of that. This is a poor ripoff of Planet of the Apes. It feels like a fever dream gone awry. And I'm baffled that, I think it was Avon Camelot, greenlit this book to be in this series. It's insulting. Okay? We haven't even talked about the characters. The mom character is alright in this story. Nick, he's an idiot. The brother, he's an outright idiot. And the only time he actually comes clean and redeems himself is when Amber has to pretty much beg him to buy some sense. And the dad has to be the dumbest parent I have ever read in anything. Ever. Not just kids' horror, but ever. The dad is absolutely a moron. Straight and through. He's the real cause for all of this to happen. And when he had the chance to pretty much divert this whole story, he chose the dumb route. And it made me physically and mentally hate his character. And he's forever in the hall of shame of parents I've ever read in any of these books. He is awful. Okay? Jessica is a good character, but not really much to her, unfortunately. You do feel some sympathy that she's lost her family, and Amber's friendship with her is kind of touching. And like I said, that's part of my positives with it. But aside from those characters, there's really no other characters. There are what they're called 3 pup children in this book, and they all have like these F names like Fluffy, Furry, and I don't know the other one. Flinchy or something. I don't care to know. But those characters aren't even touched on. The Pinchers, who hired the dad, they're not really even touched on in this story. This whole book, right, is essentially about Amber worrying about being in the town of Wolfsburg and wondering if she's ever going to get her old life back. And while that's a sad story for her because her family's utterly terrible, especially her father, there's nothing really exciting about this book. You would think that something absurd like this, having dogs act like humans, would be more fun. But this book is just boring. And it goes through cliches of animals. Like, we're going to send you to the pet store. We're going to put you in the pound. We're going to take you to a human show that's supposed to be like a dog show. We're going to take you to obedience school. teach you how to fetch, sit. It is boring, okay? It plays on every single pet story cliche possible, and it's just really cringe, okay? It was really hard, and I stress this to you. It was so hard to get through this book. And I read this book a couple days prior to making this video, and I had to take a small step back because I had no idea where I wanted to rate this book. Because in a lot of ways, I think this book is purposefully trying to be terrible. And I think it succeeds at that. But because of one redeeming factor, I struggled where I wanted to put this. So, in case you don't know my ratings, this book is not getting higher than a 2.5. You know, pretty much for everything I said about this book, it just tanks it down. And I guess we can bring up one more thing, the ending to it. There's really no ending. And what it constitutes, it does make it feel like a big waste of time getting to this point because it ends so abruptly. We don't really get to see any payoff to what the final act was setting up. And that's also infuriating in its own right. But that also included, this is lower than a D-. This is a straight F-tier book. Straight up. I deducted essentially 3 points off the top for all those problems mentioned. And so we're already down to a 2 out of 5. And I deducted another 0.5 off. For the sheer, like I said, I already brought up, I'm really appalled that this publisher greenlit this book into a Goosebumps knockoff series. How this even was considered to be good literature is just beyond me. This might be one of the worst books I've ever read, ever. Period. Not even just in the genre, ever. It's terrible. It's toilet paper. Flush it down the toilet. If you paid your hard-earned money on this book back in the day, or you got this from a book fair, or your parents, you know, they only had, you know, what money they had to spend on you, and they wanted to get you a book, and they got you this. It should just be burned. It should not exist. It's terrible. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'd probably give this book, and I'm being generous with this, I'd probably give this book a 1.5 out of 5. This is a flat F. Not all the way a 1, because like I said, I think Amber does save it from being a flat 1. But this book is atrocious. I seriously do not recommend this book from this series. And please, if you have not read Spinetinglers before and you want to try it, do not start with this book. Please don't. And if you have read it and you do like it, I want to know, what about it do you like? I mean, I can see that people might like it being, you know, just out there and kind of goofy and silly. But to say this is genuinely good? No. I'm not ever going to buy that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Pet Store. Let me know down in the comment section down below. If you've read this before, do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.